we had fraternities and sororities throwing all kinds of parties, wearing blackface in the year 2010, you know, like wearing blackface, doing cross the border parties, like their racism knew no bounds.
Oh my God.
So it was.
Welcome everybody to the Melanated panel discussion. Today we're going to be covering the Black perspective, the Black American perspective in America. And so let's just jump right into it. Is race an issue in the U.S.?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 It is.
Of course.
So,
Okay.
and since you guys are saying definitely it is an issue in the United States, are Black people specifically treated differently in the U.S.? And if so, how so?
I'll jump at once.
Well, since nobody's saying anything, the question was, how are they treated differently?
Yeah, so specifically Black people.
I can give an example of how I was treated differently. For example, going in a store and being followed, or always trying to get asked some questions like, do you need help? Did I ask for help?
Yes. I'll follow up with what she said. That has been a particular issue for me, at least I would say within this past year, especially being in Seattle with going to stores and being followed, and first going into the store and knowing that I've been immediately profiled has been very difficult. And I speak to managers and general managers, and nothing seems to change. So I'm hoping that with all of the protests that are happening and changes that are happening with discussions about defunding the police, is that that the conversation about racial profiling in retail, shopping while Black, that is addressed. And the reason why I said that is because oftentimes people who are in law enforcement, when they leave their career, they go into retail doing security. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same cycle, but you know, in a business, and that's not fair.
I was just gonna add off just racial injustice in the job working in. This is kind of like just what I experienced. It's just when you go. You go and work at jobs, you can see the racial difference of who's in power versus who's not in power. So just even going into like a big corporation, switching to working for the county, you can just clearly see that you have to work way harder as a Black person, just to, even as a Black woman, you have to work way harder just to get the jobs that you know you can do, but they don't give it to you. So you have to work way harder to get that manager position or a chief position. And versus you see somebody else like a white male, they will just get it just because they know somebody. And you know for a fact they're not suitable for that position. So that's just my basis of what I see just working in generally in Seattle too.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I recently held a discussion with my team. So I decided that because there were so many of my teammates that were reaching out to me in the last 2 to 3 weeks around, I know it's been difficult, in the US, and, I'm really the only Black American person across the entire UK and Ireland. Ooh. So everyone's kind of looking to me for, well, what do you think? What's your perspective? What are my, what's my playbook? What is my plan of action? Give me the top 3 things I need to do. And so I had a few people reach out to me a few weeks ago saying, look, I really just want to have a one-to-one conversation with you for my own knowledge and for my own personal growth. And so I decided to widen that conversation across my team, which is a team of about 60 people. And so out of that, I had about 35, 40 join a call that I did about 2 weeks ago. And one comment that I made on the call, because someone who was, a white British male said, he basically asked me, he goes, what has your journey been like coming into because I know for me, I accept my white privilege. And I know that my journey to get to where I am has been probably a heck of a lot easier for me than it's been like for you. And a comment that I made was, I grew up with my mother as a single parent in Oakland, California. And so we had a lot of different, what people would term to be like obstacles or challenges, or gaps that we had to kind of, mitigate or jump through. And one thing that my mother always instilled for me since I was a little girl, since I was like 4 or 5 years old, is the world is not always going to be fair. People are not always going to look at you and say that Brea is so brilliant, she's beautiful, she's this, she's that, and then account for the fact that, she's capable. You will always work twice as hard to get half as far. And that's just going to be your life. And you need to, at a young age, accept that for what it is. So to answer his question was, I've obviously had a lot of, racial injustice and discrepancies and things that I felt like, made it very tough for me to get where he is today, even though he's 10 years younger than what I am, and we're in the same position. But I absolutely have had to work twice as hard to get to where I am. So my mother didn't lie. It is what it is. And we had that same conversation just 2 weeks ago, my mother and I. And even in my 34-year-old self, I had to sit back and, we had that same conversation from when I was 6 and 7 years old. And she said, yes, you will always have to be in this position, but don't take any kind of negative connotation behind it. It's just kind of the way the world is set up for you, which is very, disheartening to say the least.
Right.
Nice.
So, from that point, I wanted to ask you guys, do any of you guys remember the first time that someone pointed out that you were Black, or the first time you knew you were Black? Because I hear a lot of people talk about this, or people who grow up in predominantly white areas where they don't necessarily know or think that they're Black until a kid at school or something tells them, oh, I don't want to play with you because you're Black, or because you're a nigger, or whatever, whatever word that they learn from hearing their parents say it at home. And then they realize, okay, well, I guess I am different now. So do you guys remember the first time you knew you were Black? I don't have any recollection of that, because I feel like I've just always known that. But I wanted to hear from other people's point of view, like if they have experienced that, like not knowing that they were different until somebody pointed out, whether it's a kid or an adult or someone that you know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I always knew, was cognizant of my Blackness, but when I realized when I realized that I was going to be treated differently, was when I was in elementary school, probably about I think 5th or 6th grade, and we were going to an event. My mother always had us in anything educational. She's a school teacher. I'm from Virginia. And so we were going to an event with a bunch of younger Black students going to an HBCU tour. And the bus that we were on stopped in this small town, Suffolk, Virginia. And so we were trying to get some water. And we stopped by a store, and within, I would say 3 minutes, there was a group of white men who were in a truck and wanted to see what us children were doing standing in front of this store. And we asked about getting some water. And I would never forget that he said in this thick Southern accent that there's no water in the whole county. And he called me ma'am. Right. Called me ma'am. I was like 10. Ma'am. And so number one, that shows that they have no, are not cognizant at all of how old we are. When they perceive us, when they see us, they perceive us as being much older than who we really are. And the fact that they even showed up so quickly to a store with just children standing, trying to get some water, and could have really done some damage had the adults who were on the bus not coming, gotten us and taken us back back to the bus until we waited for someone to repair the truck. But that's when I realized that I would be treated differently, even no matter what age I was.
Nice. That's crazy.
Thanks for sharing that. Alicia, I have a question because you mentioned that he called you ma'am and then he didn't know how old you are. So I always hear people say that, oh, Black kids are perceived as older than what they are. Do you guys actually believe that they perceive that people are older, or that they want to do that in order for certain things to work in their way? So if they were to I don't know, commit an act of violence toward you, and then they can make up the lie that, well, I thought this was an adult, when in actuality, you know for a fact that this is not a child. And I know at some time, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that is real, and I can't remember the study, but they surveyed police officers and showed them images of children and asked what they thought the age of that child, different races, and on average, the Black children, specifically the males, were said to be at least 3 to 5 years older than what they actually were, which to me makes sense when Tamir Rice was shot and killed. And when we see our children, and with a 12-year-old, I mean, especially if you talk to them long enough, that they're children. They're not an adult.
Right. So, goofy as can be.
Right. And so the same thing happens with law enforcement and people in general, that when they see our children, that they are perceived to be much older. And the things that you would expect from a 17-year-old, you cannot expect from someone who is 11 and 12.
Right. Alicia, in that study, did they say why they perceive the kids as older, the Black children as older? Did they go into detail there? I'm just curious. I'm wondering what is making them think that they are older than what they are. Outside of height, I know some kids are a lot taller, but outside of height, what is making them feel like the child may or may not be 3 to 5 years older than what they actually are?
Number one, a lack of connection to the community, and not being familiar with who we are as a people. The other one was that they're sometimes relying on a myth of superhuman strength of Blacks, and being muscular in build, and it's basically relying upon stereotypes. All of what they perceive, they were all stereotypes.
Okay.
As soon as I find that study, I'll share it with you.
Please do.
Find it while we're discussing.
Okay. Does anybody else have an example when they first found out that they're Black, or maybe that they will be treated differently because they are Black?
I can share.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I would say, being the complexion that I am, always having to explain to kids that I have 2 Black parents, and no matter like what you say, I'm gonna say that, oh no, I'm Black. And I can remember these experiences from like 1st grade on when I went to public school, because all of my preschool, my parents were intentional about putting me and my older sister in schools around Black kids. We had very Black experiences. But from 1st grade on, I can remember just always having to defend on the playground like it was a topic that I wanted to talk about, and it wasn't. Kids just kind of forcibly talk about it. But the thing for me, when I realized, kind of what Brea was saying, is that this is kind of how the world works. Because where my parents are from Deep East Texas. They're from Jasper. And so I remember in 1998 when James Byrd Jr. was killed and drugged by white supremacists. And why that stuck so close for me is because the road where this actually occurred is the road where I remember growing up learning how to ride horses. So that was very familiar, and it hit very close to home. So I knew from then on, even as a child, and processing what that looked like, because, the cases take a while. And times like this, they're reliving it. We knew what Sundown Town was, way before people have to explain it. You know, we're talking about now Vidor, Texas, and now there was a Black Lives Matter march. People who are from Deep East Texas and their parents who are from these places, you know, that's a place that you just keep on rolling. You don't get thirsty. You don't have to use the bathroom. You just keep going. And we learned that from an early age.
Shantel, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna share a story. So like, I guess the question is, I always knew I was Black, but to know that it was a problem to other people was like when I was a young age. So like, probably like 9 years old, we went to play, like we played a lot of white schools. And it was mostly the parents that were the problem. It wasn't the children. It was always the parents. So we were playing basketball. They're screaming nigger in the audience all through the whole game. Then when we get back to our bus, somebody spray painted the whole entire bus nigger. They like broke the windows, came on the bus and was like screaming and acting crazy. So we had to like, the teachers and the coaches had to like kind of like push them off the bus.
Yeah.
And then like think about it, because I'm from a diverse community. I've always been around African, Mexican, all kinds of people. So it's like, oh, it's normal to us. But when you go and play the communities that you only see white people, it was just like, oh, they don't like they're afraid of us because of how we look. But all we do is we're just here to play sports. We're just here to have fun. And we're only 9 years old. It doesn't matter about that. So then I guess that's the day I was like, okay, I know I'm Black. I know it's always been a problem, but this is what I'm going to have to face. And I guess that's where realization was in that prospect.
And so, Shantel, were these like parents who were getting on the bus doing this stuff?
Parents, like grown, like 50, 40 years old. And like, of course, you know, as a child, just like us, we learn from our parents. So whatever our parents feel and hate, we're going to feel and hate the same way. So I feel like a lot of children, they hate people because of what they heard from their parents. So I guess it transpired down to the children too, because of course they were, you know, they're like, to them, it's like they felt like it's normal to do what their parents are doing because they see their people that they look up to do it. So it was parents, like grown people, like some old people, grown women, grown men. It was crazy.
Do you remember like what city that was in?
Edenville.
Yep. Yeah. I knew it was something like that because every time we went to go play basketball out in like Snohomish County, that would happen, like playing, I think the school was called Squim.
Yep, we played
every
swim
single
too.
time.
Yep, we played swim was bad, but they had to stop. We had to stop going there. They like wouldn't let us go there no more.
Yeah. So yeah, I never really had an experience that made me knew that I was gonna be treated differently. But because like you said, you grow up Black, you already know you're Black, your parents already give you a warning. Yeah. Right. Like I don't even remember learning anything about it, but you know already. Right. And I guess it's from, you know.
And I was gonna say, I think that's probably because mom and dad told us. That's why I said I don't remember when the first time was, but I think it's just because it happened so early on that we just were forewarned before we even got a chance to go out in the world to figure it out for ourselves.
Right. And back then when we were growing up in the Seattle area, for people who do not know, it was very diverse compared to what it is right now. I don't know what this is.
This is completely different.
So like the racism was not an issue in the Seattle area, but on outskirt areas definitely happened. Like when we moved down to Vancouver, Washington, that's the first time I got suspended from school. I was fighting somebody because they called me a nigger at the lunch table. So for me, that was my first experience being called that. But when we lived in Seattle Federal Way area, there was no issues with that.
Yeah,
there was always Black people around, Mexicans, Samoans,
Pacific Islander people.
Yeah, everybody was always here. And when I went to school, I was not the only Black kid in my class type of thing.
Yeah,
so
me too.
I never really experienced that until we moved outside of the metro Seattle area.
Yeah, what you just talked about also reminded me when we moved south to the Spanaway area, and I remember
Yeah,
that
that
one
happened.
kid,
That happened to me there
that was
too.
on the bus that was doing. So you guys, we were on the bus going home from school, and he was doing like monkey noises and calling us niggers or whatever. And my sister also beat up this boy, this white boy on the bus.
That's true.
But and so that's another racism issue. I was the only one suspended from school from that. Like they had security waiting for me when we pulled up to the school, like in middle school.
Right. So he was the aggressor and the person calling someone a racial slur. However, she was suspended from school for protecting me and her from a racist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the question is always like, what did you do? You know, to you it comes first. Oh, what did you do that provoked them or set them off? You know, it's never like looking at all pictures. I mean, I would say for myself, like, so I mean, I sit in a unique position because I'm a transracial adoptee, and so for me, I was raised by white parents in an all white town. Except, well, there was Hispanics there, but for myself, like I was just far enough apart in age from my sister that we never were in the same school because our school was always like, oh, this year we're gonna have middle school and high school blend together. Oh no, next year we're not. So like we were always in different schools, just because of our 2-year age gap. But it was something that I was always aware of. Just, you know, I think like for me, one thing was like sports, is people like, oh, it's just like gonna be a basketball star. Except for growing up for me, I was a competitive figure skater. Like, yes, I was, you know, tall and lean, but basketball was not my sport. I was a figure skater. But I mean, like, I remember my mom, like, always telling me, because people would always just be questioning, like, oh, are you going to get enrolled in the team? Are you going to do this? My mom's like, no, she's going to do what she wants to do. If she wants to play basketball, cool. If she doesn't, she doesn't. Like, why is it, like, some assumption that because she's this Black woman, here she is going to be playing these sports? And then I think it's also very true, the piece around, like, for white children that come to school and what their family is maybe rooted in. I've had real mixed feelings, you know, with a lot of schools trying to speak out right now against everything that's going on. And I was just like, if you want to do that, though, then you also have to be providing like safe spaces at your school to really educate your students, especially white students who we know are going back home to a racist environment. You know, I think that's just like big, is that people need to be like, okay, yeah, we know that their parents are probably racist up to you can't, you know, say how high at home, but yet you want to change a child's like demeanor or the way they approach kids. Like that's just, it's not the same. You know, and yeah, I mean, maybe kids hear it from their parents or hear it from each other, but then I feel like the schools are not also correcting it and being like, that's absolutely not okay. Like they just want to turn a blind eye to, like, if they weren't in the room when they heard it or didn't see it, then oh no, it didn't happen. They probably didn't say what you said they said. Like, let's just move on. You know, it's yeah.
So since we're talking about like being a child, have you guys ever had a teacher or maybe a college professor or someone who is an educator and you're the student, say anything that was something similar to a microaggression toward you because you were a Black person, or say, oh, well, maybe you don't need to try to take that class, you know, that might be a little too tough for you, or, you know, something of this, or basically trying to discourage you from being a smart person because they're downplaying your abilities because they have some type of assumption about Black people. Have you guys experienced that before in school?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I recently told the story to my team about how my high school, you know, journey was. So again, you know, born and raised in Oakland, California, and the school district in Oakland was then and still is and has historically been underserved, you know, kind of underfunded, you know. So my mother decided that she wanted me to go to school in Alameda, California, which is not that far from Oakland. So I switched over to, you know, or moved to high school there and did my freshman year there. And it was very apparent to me, even at 14 years old, coming into the school, that you know, it was just as bad as Oakland was. You know, we didn't have any textbooks. We were getting A's just for showing up to class. I was skipping school. The law in California is that you need to be in school 180 days for you to be able to pass, that grade. And when it was all said and done, I think I was in school 90 days because it was so easy to skip class and still get the A's. And so my mother quickly realized that, we need to pull her out of this school. And, we ended up moving to Brentwood, California, which at the time I deemed to be white suburbia. I enrolled in a school there. I went from a school that was 98% Black to a school that was 2% Black. And that's about 1 in every 60, 70 kids, to put that into context. So I entered into this high school in my sophomore year. And of course, I wanted to be in the honors classes, the advanced placement classes. And I was told time and time again in that 3 years that I was there that, oh, this is too difficult for you. You're not ready for this. You don't need to do this. You just take this class instead. And it even went as far as I had teachers that were questioning my intellectual aptitude. They were assuming, because I came from that school district, that my IQ wasn't where it needed to be. And I was asked and told to and made to take tests to, determine my intellectual aptitude, to even be in that school, let alone those classes. So I had teachers that said, you don't belong. Teachers that have actually blocked me from enrolling in those courses. They would go to administration and say, I know she's going to try to get into AP calculus. No, she needs to be back in geometry, even though that was a course I took 2 years
ago.
Right. So definitely.
That speaks to the issue that is happening in our community with believability, and where you're having to constantly prove your worth and your value, whether you are in grade school, whether you're at work, whether you're going to the hospital, the doctor's office, when something is happening with you, and people not valuing our what we say is happening. And there has to be a shift in not with us, but a shift with them, that when we say that something is happening, it's happening. And it's not anything that's being made up. We're not formulating these scenarios and scenes in our mind. It's happening. When a woman is pregnant and she is saying that something is wrong, something is happening, and the doctor should believe her when she comes into the office to say this is something is not right. And that, I believe that is definitely why we are seeing more issues happening, especially in healthcare. But I don't know how I got on that, but yeah, believability.
Yeah. Anybody else have a story they can share as far as school is concerned? Okay. Well, we'll move it along then. Still in school, but what about in college? For anyone who's gone off to college, have you had any experiences there? And outside of like an educator trying to deter you from taking a class, have you ever been the only Black person in your classes in college, or were you treated a certain way because you were at a predominantly white school and people, the white kids are saying certain stuff that they think are cool, but it's actually racist as fuck? Like, has anybody had any of these kind of situations happen to them?
In PLU, that there was only 6 Black people in the whole entire college, and that's in Tacoma and Parkland. So that's like a culture shock, and it was just you just had to source and figure out things that, find the teachers that were willing to help you, because they're not all willing to help you. They'll let you fall by the wayside, versus you see the other teacher reach out to other students and make sure that they can get that help and make sure they get that good grade. So I don't know, when I went to Pacific Lutheran, that was just too much for me. Like, to be only 6 black people, you can count them on one hand. That was like 5 when I went there. And to see that I wasn't getting the help that I needed, and it just, that's the only thing. There was no administrator. They were more like, I guess I'll call them like liberal, like passive. versus in your face. So it was like the passive racism where it's like, oh, we see that you're there, but it just, you're like nobody. You're like a wall, and we're just gonna walk past you. We don't care about your education. You have to, whatever you need or whatever you want, you have to reach forward, and you have to pick up your boots by the wayside. They love to say that.
The bootstraps.
Like
Pick up yourself by the bootstraps.
Bootstraps.
Pick up them bootstraps.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it safe.
Anybody else have a story? I also went to PLU. That's why Shantel's like, yeah, PLU. I was probably the only, I feel like every once in a while I had a class where there was one other Black person in the class, and it was always the other Black girl. I don't think I've had another class that was a Black guy in the class with me. And
oh man,
nobody, I would say, there wasn't overt racism, but there was just, you're not one of us kind of thing, where people would never even talk to you. And I was glad that I didn't live on campus. I was a commuter student, because I literally hadn't met anyone except for one other white girl that was actually cool during my orientation that I'm still friends with now. But outside of her, no one I talked to on campus, everything was very surface level, and they act like you're cool while you're there if you spoke to them, but they would not speak to you. People that you've had classes with since your freshman year, you're now in your senior year, and they will walk past you on campus like they've never seen you in their life, like this kind of stuff. Like basically like you don't exist.
Yeah, like you're a wall. That's exactly how it was.
So I wouldn't say I had anything overt, like, being called racial slurs, or a teacher saying something specifically to me that's like trying to deter me from taking a certain class. But just basically the invisible part was to me a big thing.
Same. And I lived on campus, so I got it all the time, 24 hours a day.
I was gonna say, I really didn't experience it from educators. I think like the biggest thing that I got from an educator was, I studied broadcast journalism, and our cohort was really small, but there were 2 other Black women there, so I never felt alone until it became my week to anchor our show. We had a pretty extensive broadcast studio, all the resources in the world, and the day before I was gonna anchor, my professor looked at me and was like, "Oh, well, I don't know what we're gonna do with your hair." And that was when I had first gone natural. Everybody had their, teeny weeny afros, or like medium-sized afros. Everybody's real cute together. Dorm rooms just covered in products. But from that moment on, I just realized, like, this is not a career that I want. So that kind of shaped, even what I would do. I was like, this is a conversation that I'm gonna have, and not being somebody's, token Black person, I don't even want to continue down this career path. I want to be doing something that I love, not arguing about how I present to you, or if this market doesn't want this type of Black woman, then I wouldn't have a job. And one of my friends who's in that career has experienced that herself as well. So that, I would say that's one of the main things I got within the classroom. But outside of the classroom, it was kind of the Wild West. We knew the differences in fraternities and sororities. We knew that those were not spaces for us. We had fraternities and sororities throwing all kinds of parties, wearing blackface in the year 2010, like wearing blackface, doing cross the border parties, like their racism knew no bounds.
Oh my gosh.
So it was everybody who was not Black. It got to the point to where that area, even throwing bleach bombs at Black students. Yeah. And so it just, it just knew no bounds, and kind of with believability as well. We had a few Black administrators on campus, going hard for us. But other than that, there's really no support. We would have our campus police department and say, well, technically that's off campus, so that's the city police department who has to deal with that. And we see we have no support from them across the board. Yeah. So I also, when I was in school, affirmative action, I was in the Black Student Alliance. we had NAACP LDF supporting us to write an amicus brief with several other campuses, but Abigail Fisher, who challenged affirmative action and had the Koch brothers funding her, that came out of my university. And really, she just wasn't good enough to get in. And so it came to a point where, you know, we're taking time away to go and, you know, fight for this, away from our studies, because this is important, not just for our university, but for the entire world. So that's the climate that we're in. And that brings us to today, where the biggest thing in the news is that our athletes wrote a letter of support saying, hey, get the rest of these buildings that are named after Confederates. We don't want this here anymore. Change the school song, and all these other demands that have, you know, just being in the South and racism. And people act like it's novel, but really it's been going on the college campus.
No, and tokenism, I feel like, is big. I mean, not just in college, but also like in the employment field too.
Do you want to expand, elaborate, Deshanna?
Oh, well, I mean, for my own self at my job, so I work as a foster care social worker for a nonprofit organization in Seattle. And we have a director that's an African-American woman, transracial adoptee. And I definitely feel like the leadership level looks at it like, oh, you know, we're doing well, we're bringing in diversity, because we have this, you know, I mean, we do have, I guess, 2 directors that are people of color. But I'm like, that's not enough. But yet, and you also have like Black employees that have complained about the way that we're treated within the work that we do. Because for me, I work on a direct service level. So I work directly with foster parents and caregivers. And that's a whole issue in itself. I won't even go into that. But like recently, a question was asked about doing a training for foster parents. And like right away, the comment was like, oh, we'll just have the director do it. We'll just have her do it, because of course, like her as a Black woman and a transracial adoptee, of course, she knows all when having conversations around what it's like to be Black right now, and how our, you know, caregivers who are transracially parenting can speak to their kids about what's going on. And like, I like quickly responded in the group being like, hey, you know, there's 3 other Black staff who could easily have been asked or even proposed the question of like, are you interested in doing this? Versus just being like, oh, let's just pick that one person. And I felt mixed for myself, because this person has been open in stating in spaces of predominantly Black spaces that she doesn't feel that she fits in with the Black culture. You know, and that's the thing in itself of being a transracial adoptee, especially if you're transracially adopted and raised by white parents. Like, a lot of adoptees do feel that way, so I won't take that away. But it's just like, when someone does say that, I feel like there needs to be, you know, pause and question given a little bit to, okay, well then let's make sure we also hear from other voices that maybe don't feel that way. But yeah, I just definitely feel like she's a tokenized person in our organization. And like, when I tried to ask about it, I definitely was asking it in like the sense of racism and the piece behind that, because the, you know, any place where there's racism, sexism, like tokenism is probably said to exist. And one of my coworkers really quickly was like, oh, well, what about, are you asking this like in a historical sense? Are you asking this about in like a psychosocial sense? And I was like, why are you going into all this extra? I'm just specifically asking, do you think tokenism exists in the organization? And, you know, luckily, like a couple people did answer, but a good like 50 people looked at it and probably only 6 people responded. And I was just like, oh, okay, thanks. You guys are showing yourselves too by not responding or saying anything, because
they didn't have the politically correct response ready.
Right, yeah. I mean, I know I was disrespected by a family that I work with, and I feel like had it been her, the agency would have been all over responding. But for me, it was 4 months before the agency finally even reached out to the family, because there was so much concern about their feelings and how they would react and if they would be able to take in the information. But I was just like, as a Black person, we sit in uncomfortability every single day, if not every second. And so, like, no, you have to acknowledge this and also acknowledge it to how it could look to even a Black person against another Black person. And not that it should be a fight against one another, but like, how come she gets to be tokenized as though she's the voice of all reason? Yet here I am, a Black person too, and I'm like not even the adoptee piece around having conversations, because that's not what it's about. It's about just having conversations with a parent parenting a Black child who's white, sitting here being like, oh, let's just have conversation. Because I think it's traumatizing. I mean, I like these conversations, even if you're having them with another person of color or a Black person, I feel like it's traumatizing talking about what's going on because it's not new for any of us. Mm-hmm. And so it can be re-traumatizing to still be having all this of like, oh, you know, how do you approach somebody? How do you speak with someone? How do you code switch? Because I mean, I know I've been like probably a victim of code switching myself and doing it. And I'm like, no, but see me. Yes, I may be able to simulate well in a white space, but I'm Black.
Right. You know what else I find interesting is that they chose the woman who doesn't even really identify with her Black background to be the spokesperson to talk about diversity or whatever the case may be. Like, I'm sorry, but that's a joke already.
Chosen. That's why she was chosen.
Exactly. And I think
because
I think white people feel comfortable around that and don't see what I honestly see as a real sad thing. I feel heartbroken for a Black person to tell me that because of how they were raised, they feel more comfortable adopting a white child than a Black child because they don't feel like they know their own Black culture. Like, to me, those words are scary. But I don't think necessarily a white person looks at it that way or sees it like. But yeah, I'm sorry. That's a whole different thing, y'all.
No, I definitely agree. Like, if you're telling other people that they should be a part of these programs and learn this and learn that, you should also be learning it for yourself too. How are you going to be the lead when about in a subset or a segment of something that you know nothing about? Whether your skin is Black or not, if you know nothing about the Black experience or you want to act like you don't know, how are you trying to teach other people about the Black experience and how to raise a Black child? That's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
I'm really curious about how, when you mentioned tokenism in the workplace, how all of these newly created diversity and inclusion roles are going to play out. Because, you know, we see all these people, director of this, director of diversity and inclusion, it's a Black person, and it seems like for the first time we're having a seat at the table. There are no Black distinguished engineers, but we can have a Black D&I person, you know, and I'm looking ahead to see, you know, what's going to happen in 10 years when all these quotas are met. Are they going to determine, oh, we just don't need this anymore? Like, what's going to happen then?
But even then,
no, go right ahead.
I was gonna say, even then, I feel like it's hard though, because like, so at my organization, we're trying to hire for a DI director, and sadly, unfortunately, I think it's partly because it's not a full-time position, maybe why we didn't get the best turnout. But when it kind of came down to it, the people who were like the most interested in the applicants that we got are 2 white women, but then some of the staff are saying because it is a predominantly all white organization, that it may be easier for a white person to hear about this from another white person, you know. I don't know, like,
I want to hear that.
I was mixed on it because I definitely am like, I don't want to hear a white person tell me about the Black experience or try to educate me about the Black experience. But I also get probably at the end of the day, like, I don't really need this for me. You need it for you. Exactly. But it's true. Like, it's hard. Like, I want to have a DEI director that is a person of color, you know, and not a white person. But I've also kind of opened up my ears a little bit to listening that it's true. Maybe a white person needs to hear from a white person.
Ask Rachel.
Yeah, I'm so, oh my goodness. I am so on the fence. Not even on the fence. Like, I just don't feel that, you know, like with you know, corporation work for today, you know, everybody's just kind of, and a lot of these big tech companies and larger corporations in America are starting to, you know, kind of action themselves. Like, you know, we need to do something, and it's very reactionary. And it's like, you know, the first thing they want to do is put a Black person in a directorial position for diversity and inclusion. The next thing they want to do is talk about how do we change our recruitment efforts so that, you know, we are diversifying the portfolio of candidates that we're interviewing. Do we then set up shop at more HBCUs? Are we going to more predominantly Black cities? Like, what is it that we're going to do so that we don't look like we represent a company that is not inclusive and not diverse?
Mhm.
And all of this to me is bullshit, because I don't feel the fix is putting a Black person in a directorial role for diversity inclusion. The fix is not saying that, oh, we hired 1,010 Black people in 2020. The fix is, why have you not done this in the first place? And getting to the bottom of, for the S team in these corporations, it's not okay to say that, oh, one of our S team goals is to make sure we have one Black face in S team by the end of 2020. That's not the fix. And so, I mean, because I'm sorry, like, I just don't feel that, while, I agree with you, Deshanna, that maybe a Black person in a D&I directorial role would be what I would resonate better with than, say, a white person. These organizations are predominantly white to begin with. And so maybe it is best that we have a white person in those roles. But at the end of the day, it's at a corporation level. And what I'm really bothered by is the fact that the corporation wants to jump into action to make themselves appear to be more diverse and inclusive, but not actually looking inward and looking at the people already within the corporation.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
And it's like, well, what are you doing with your current employees? Everybody's not going to be, you weren't a part of this organization probably a year ago or 2 years ago, and you're not going to be a part of this organization, say, a year from now or 2 years from now. Average tenure in tech companies now is somewhere around 18 months, right? So if you're not doing the work to actually understand the mindset of the people that you claim to be the best, and to hire these people, if you're not doing that work inside of the company, of the people you currently have in-house, then the issue is just going to perpetuate. I mean, it looks good for you to say that, yes, we have a Black face, not to be derogatory, but we have a Black face. But then it's also one thing to show that you are genuinely diverse and inclusive. And that is my biggest hang up, even with being with everyone is so quick to jump into action to do something, but you don't even understand what you need to be actioning.
Right.
Right. No, definitely.
I'm glad you said that, Brea. I pulled up this study that looked at tech companies because they made a pledge to increase diversity, and this was 6 years ago. And so it said, I don't want to say all the names, you never know who's watching, but 6 years, right? 6 years after their
let
diversity.
it fly, girl, let it fly.
6 years after their first diversity reports, blank, 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 and blank, 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 have seen low single-digit increases in their percentage of Black employees. One company 6 years ago had 3% Black employment, and today, 6 years later, is 3.8%.
In 6 years.
So it hasn't even moved. And so this is my other thing about this diversity position is that I feel like I don't necessarily think it needs to be a Black person or a person of color, because I feel like that's the position they always try to give a Black person. Everybody that I know, well, not everybody, but a lot of people that I know who work at our company, I don't know if we want to be saying the name or not, but at our company, the people that I know in diversity and inclusion positions are people of color. But when these people of color go into these positions and actually try to make change, there are people who are not people of color who are blocking the strategies and the plans that they're trying to put in place to actually make a change. And so for me, I do believe that it needs to be a white person who is actually invested in other groups of people and not just themselves to talk to white people, so then white people are more willing to accept what this person is bringing to them and help them even, I don't know, maybe bring experiences from their own life as to like, yeah, well, I've also dealt with this type of systemic racism and I know it because I've seen it in my house or a family member or whatever, but this is how I found that those things were not the right way about going about things, and then help the other people move along, because some people don't want to hear that they're wrong, especially from a person who they know they've been doing wrong. So I think if they're hearing it from a white person who's actually here for the cause, then I think it will go further, because I find that Black people are always getting blocked in the corporate space every time they're actually trying to move the needle.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like.
I definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, because I feel like a white person in such a role, although in, you know, kind of first perception, say of the company's Black employees, it may be that original, like that kind of, you know, backlash of, well, why is a white person in this role?
Yeah.
You know, when they can't speak for my experience, for us as a people, as a community. But you got to understand that we're already in the minority anyway. So that D&I person is really not speaking to you. They're speaking on behalf of you, but they're speaking to those who are the change makers, and they don't look like us.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, you guys, now we're going to fast forward a little bit. We were talking about childhood, school age. Now let's fast forward to adulthood. Now, like, how does racism show up in your daily lives outside of work? And then we're going to go into work afterwards. So outside of work, going to the grocery store, pumping your gas. How does race show up in those situations for you guys?
You know, I moved with my, since we're not saying company names, although I've name dropped it several times already,
Right.
with my
That's
current
whatever.
organization. You can clean it up, Tierra. But my current organization, I relocated to London just over a year ago. And it's been challenging. It's been very challenging, to say the least. This is that I have a mini Meghan Markle experience on a weekly basis, being in London. And you know, to me, it's astounding, you know, some of the things that people will say and will do, the commentary, you know, the microaggressions. You know, I feel like as a woman, I've regressed in coming to London, and I hate
Brea,
to say it that way.
since we're like spreading awareness, can you actually drop some of these microaggressions that have happened? Like, actually give the example, so when people watch this, they know what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we weren't speaking specifically about work, but I mean, I moved here for work, right? So I think it's important for me to share, you know, kind of what that's looked like, because I know that some of these microaggressions that have happened to me while living in London, I have to believe in my heart they wouldn't fly if I were still in America. So being on the job, you know, one is, you know, I purchased a, you know, half zip, you know, hoodie thing, and I wore it to work with some jeans and some, you know, some trainers or some tennis shoes, as we say in the US. And, you know, I had a colleague of mine saying, "Oh, Brea, look at you. You're looking really gangster today." Another one would be just within my first month of being on the job, I had a manager. You know how, you know, you're trying to get to know people on your team, right? So then, you know, they pull out their phone and they're flipping through pictures and like, "Oh, these are my children," and then stops on the younger, you know, the youngest child and says, "Oh, and this one here, you know, she's a dancer." And I said, "Oh, that's awesome." I said, "You know, I used to dance as well. Like, what, you know, style of dance does she do?" Well, let's just say that her friends tell her that she's a Black girl trapped in a white girl's body. That same manager, in a different setting, in an off-site setting, but still in a team setting, grabs my forearm and rubs my forearm and says, "Oh my gosh, your skin tone is so beautiful. How do I get mine that way?" Had a colleague who wore a piece of apparel. It was a t-shirt. And I wore this t-shirt into the office with a brand that reads "Ski Mississippi" across the top. And then the graphic is a cotton field with a cotton gin in the background of it. And there is a white person skiing over the cotton field. I didn't say anything because I was I didn't know, I was, in my mind, I was about to go 5150, to be fair. But I excused myself. I went outside and I got some air and, took a moment. I come back in and there were 4 others that were a part of the group. And they were lighting him up. Like, that's a very racist thing. Why would you even wear that shirt to work, let alone, outside of work? And I remember him saying that I don't see anything wrong with this. I don't, it's just a brand. It's just a t-shirt. It's just a thing. Like, what's the problem with it? And I then had to further excuse myself to then go to the restroom to collect myself. And when I came out of the restroom, he had left the pub. He was gone, so, I mean, that's just within the work setting, being out in the streets of London, there have been things that have been said and have been done, so it's, I honestly feel that it's compounded more in London than it is, I would say, in my American corporate experience and American just kind of way of life. In general, right? I constantly feel that I am being asked to take people to the side to educate and to educate and to educate. And even especially in this time, right? Like, again, I'm the only Black American person in all of UK and Ireland. And so I'm being looked to, well, tell us your experiences and what can we do better? But to be fair, I feel like that piece is still very reactionary. It's very like, because we feel like we need to do better. Tell us how we can do better. But a year ago, when these things were transpiring, no one was coming to me saying, well, it seemed as if you didn't really like that comment that I said. Why? And so only now is it that, my white colleagues are turning into me and wanting to understand, but I'm not really fucking with it, because whatever it takes for you to feel better at the end of the day, that's what you're coming to me with. That's the request, right? I'm not going to give you your marching orders. You have to look inward, figure out, have you really done the work? Like, we're all degrees of separation here. Either you're guilty of making comments and doing things and actions that have dampened and hampered the Black community, or you know someone, you've been in the company of someone who has done something and said something to dampen and hamper the Black community, or you know someone who knows someone. It's all degrees of separation. So I'm not really here for let's kick it into gear and let's make change today. I'm more so about, when you told me I looked really gangster, you clearly didn't have any sort of reference. Because for me, as someone who has been a part of the Black Lives Matter movement since 2013, which originated out of Trayvon Martin, who was wearing a hoodie and who was gunned down because he looked suspicious, for you to then go and say that, oh, well, you're looking very gangster, clearly you don't connect the dots in all of this. And you don't really care to connect the dots. You only care today because you feel like you need to do something, because that's the right thing to do.
Right, because of the social climate. Now they
Exactly.
feel like they need to get into action, but a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, they're not even about to be worried about it.
And that's my thing about these corporations. Like, I'm all for, it's like donating to certain organizations, although I do question some of the organizations they're donating to. That's another story for the day. But, it's like these organizations they're donating to. I've had white colleagues come to me in recent weeks saying, I'm fundraising for these organizations, and I've been on the protest lines, and I've been out here marching, and Black Lives Matters, all lives won't matter until Black Lives Matter. I am doing my part. But I guarantee you, I can put every paycheck and stock option I have within my current company today to say 6 months from now, when this dust has settled, this will be a distant memory. And
Exactly.
And I say this in, the words of the late, great, beautiful Nipsey Hussle, the marathon continues. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're not here for the marathon, I'm not really fucking with it. I'm sorry. I don't care what you feel like you're doing today, because although it's great, the contribution you're doing today doesn't have longevity.
Right.
Well, I feel like people have been real quick lately to post about, oh, I donated to all these organizations, or I did all this and all that. But I'm like, you don't really ever see Black people posting saying, oh, I donated to this white restaurant or this white clothing store, because no one cares about that small contribution. It's true. Like, it's what you're going to do, longevity. Like, this is not new, what's going on. But yet people really want to be like, I see you, I hear you. These celebrities are posting these videos. I see you, I hear you. I won't be silent. Don't tell me what you won't be silent. Let me just keep seeing what you're doing action-wise. I don't know. It's just been so frustrating to see all these friends posting about the movie 13 and being like, oh gosh, it was so powerful.
Not even knowing that was 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's been
out. 3 years ago. 4 years ago. This is not new.
It was 3 years ago, and the information that it talked about was even longer ago. This, prison to pipeline thing is not new. The crack cocaine versus powder cocaine is not new. It brought some great information to light, which is true, and I agree with that. But what it brought to light is not new information. So you should be really angry that your parents didn't educate you about this. That's what you should be mad about and posting and being like, dang mom, dang dad, why didn't you tell me? Or why didn't our schools tell us? Why didn't society tell us? Because this information in that documentary was not new. But people wanted to post about it like it just came out. And that was like, every time I saw that, I was like, I can't even get behind it. I was just like, not gonna like it, not gonna be glad that you finally decided to educate yourself today, because you should have already done that.
And have they actually educated themselves, or did they just watch the movie and now they feel like they're educated? Because the whole I see you thing and I see you and I hear you. Do you see me? How'd you just now all of a sudden start seeing me? And if you saw me, why did this even happen in the first place? Oh, but we got to rewind, you guys, because we kind of jumped back into work and we didn't talk about how Ray shows up in our everyday life. I'll give an example because this just happened yesterday. So me and my husband, we live in a white area, a very rich white area. And when we come out of our apartment, depending on who sees us coming out of the apartment, these people will run across the street to go down the hill, to go to their car, to the trash or whatever. Yesterday, we came out to go to our car. They were coming down steps from where their apartment is, but they would have to cross us in order for them to go down the hill where they were going and for us to get in our car. And so instead of them going down the steps that are made for people to walk down, they walked behind bushes down a trail so they didn't have to stand next to us because we were getting in our car and our car was by the stairwell where they were coming down from their apartment.
That's crazy.
And so I would say that's how Ray shows up over here all the time. Like, and what is crazy is that we go on walks sometimes and there's a trail that's back here and people are always looking. They're always staring. They're either staring or the white people are smiling really big because they're scared to death. So, we smile back so we're not scaring them. Like the other week we went on a walk and this older white woman literally walked around an entire tree over into the road instead of staying on the sidewalk with us.
And this path, the path that she's talking about is not a small sidewalk.
It's not skinny. It's very wide.
People to be able to walk
side by side. Yeah. Right. And so this woman went around a tree into the street so she didn't have to walk next to us on the sidewalk. Don't have any issues really in the grocery store, but I think that's because they're used to seeing us now because we've been living here for 4 years. The people speak, people say hi, but like it's mainly in our apartment complex where people will see us walking and they'll stop and they'll watch to see if we like actually live in the building, to go in a building and stuff like that. Yeah, I would say that's like that's a regular thing. Or sometimes people will be coming up the street and we know we're gonna have to cross them to go into where our building is. And sometimes I just tell my husband, wait, those people are walking up the street, let them go, so we don't have to do a dance or a, you know, they're doing this kind of like they don't know if they want to keep walking or not. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to do the dance today. Let's just stand right here, let them walk, so then we can walk in our apartment like a normal person. Or sometimes my husband tries to even go the extra mile to say hi, like make eye contact and say and speak, because we see some of these people all the time and they still just don't want to speak. And so he will on purpose try to make eye contact to say hello, and they will do everything in their power to not even look at you, look at the ground, act like they have headphones on and can't see, anything you can think of to avoid eye contact or to not say hello.
I sometimes tell them, if you're gonna stare, at least speak.
Right.
Now, do you all, I just thought about this, since we are having to wear masks, do you all think that people treat you differently, or?
Well, I could say in some of these situations, I'm like, oh, I guess I can give them a pass. But like this was happening before people had to start putting masks on, and that's how I know that this is a race issue and it is not a COVID-19 issue.
Right. You're right.
We've been here for 4 years. You've been doing this shit for the last 4 years. So now all of a sudden COVID, I'm gonna say, oh no, it's not race. It's just COVID. People are afraid to get sick. No, they've been afraid to get sick for 4 years then. Because this has been the same situation for the last 4 years of living here. And you know what I will say? We don't get it really from our white neighbors. It's like Asian people more than white. Like the Asian people are trying to go overboard, and I see white people doing it, but the white people do it. It's just in a different way, like, oh, hey, how's it going? You know, asking a lot of questions to see if you actually live around here and you know, things of that sort. Whereas the Asian people, right, whereas the Asian people would just be fearful, overtly fearful, and I'm gonna go in the bushes instead of walking down the stairs like a normal person. How else does race show up in you guys' lives? In the store, out and about, walking around, if you have kids, with your kids?
I'll tell a quick story. I come to London, and I don't own a vehicle, and so I'm thinking like, oh, that's going to help a lot, because a lot of the times where I've been stopped have been because I've been with my more than likely Black boyfriend at the time in a vehicle, in a nice vehicle, and stopped and, you know, asked to like blow or take a field sobriety test and all this, right? So I come to London, I'm thinking, okay, you know, that's behind me. I should be good. I should be good as far as, you know, no interactions with police and all of this. And so, funny story, I was actually walking from my flat, from my apartment, to a local convenience store. And as I was walking back to my flat, I saw the police drive past me. And then I heard them like put on their siren, and they said, you know, stop, you know, you stop. And I didn't even have to turn around. I just knew they were speaking to me. So like I put my bag down on the ground and I did this and I stopped. And then I didn't hear anybody kind of get out the car or approach me. So I let like maybe a few seconds go by, and I turn around and they're actually speaking to the white man. It's a white guy who was like pretty close to me, walking behind me. And I had to check myself. I'm like, I'm so accustomed to the fact that I'm always going to be the one that is in some shit, right? I'm no matter what, whether I'm into it or not, I'm always going to be the one that's profiled as such. It never, ever in a million years, in my 34 years of existence, dawned on me that this same thing does in fact happen to white people. And it wasn't until that moment where I actually physically, I set my bag down, I was like, and I turn around and they're actually trying to get the attention of the white guy that's been walking behind me for the last, you know, minute or so. I'm like, wow, like I gotta untrain some things. It's crazy.
That is Definitely.
I would say that what does that clearly affects your mental health though, and how
Right,
how
of course.
you feel, because that's a traumatic experience, and because you have received it so much, and then all of us, it's happened to you, it happened to us so much that it it does affect our psyche, and then how what do we do now with those feelings, so that it doesn't continue to fester and internalize within us, where it begins to harm our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and harms how we interact with people. And people don't get to see the light that was in our lives before, and the care and the concern that we lose that when when it when racism affects our mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like PTSD.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Exactly.
That's for sure.
Exactly.
Tierra, we still
So do you guys code switch at work?
Yes.
No,
Oh, why don't you? So you said no. Why don't you code switch at work?
I don't need to. If you don't like how I am, then I don't know what you need to do. But I'm not about to be anybody but me. However, when I was in the military, I did have to do that. The military is super racist.
Oh, sorry.
For example, me being in just like the basic training part, like they have this book you have to read of all the codes and conducts and all this stuff. I had twisted my hair while I was in basic training, and basically I got in trouble because that was out of regulation to have braids in your hair.
Then what are you
So
supposed
okay, when I first got to basic training, I had micro braids in my hair, and the micro braids had two different colors in it, like a couple strands of like a brown blonde color. So I had to take my hair down while I was in basic training because that was out of regulations. However, there was white girls in there that had blonde streaks in their hair, Asian girls in there that had blonde streaks in their hair. They didn't have to dye their hair while they were there, so why did I have to take my braids down? I don't get it. And then when I get graduate from basic training and I go to tech school, which is like the college part before you go to your job, I would get in trouble because of my hair was out of regs again. All the time, Black people are getting in trouble because their hair is out of regs in the military. So the regulation says your hair can't be more than 3 inches out from your head. So I Bantu knotted my hair down so that when I wear my afro, it'll be this small. And I still got in trouble. I was like, you can put a ruler in my hair. It's in regs. It says it can't be more than 3 inches from your head. So I had a Filipino teacher, and he takes me to the Black lady who has natural hair. She's already in the military, but she's also a teacher. And she has her hair in a puff, and her puff is way bigger, but she's active duty. She's already in and all of that. And they take me to her for her to check my hair to see if it's in regs. Like, it's either in regs or it's not. Read it. It says it on the paper, but since it's an afro, they need to check if my hair was in regs. And then also while I was in tech school, the same teacher, he takes me to another Black lady to talk about how I talk. The way I talk is too whatever, I don't know. But then, so she's in there like, yeah, so when I first got in the military, I had to, change the way I talked and, so people won't feel offended. And I was like, bitch, I don't give a fuck what you had to do. I'm not gonna start, oh, how are you, to make somebody feel comfortable. Like, I'm saying regular stuff that everybody else is saying. Why is it uncomfortable when I'm saying it? I'm not gonna change the way I talk. I don't care. And basically moved on from there. Once I got to my station, I was a reservist, so I only had to go once a month, but I continually got in trouble for my hair being out of regs almost every weekend that I had to go do drill. So now up to here to date, now they allow people to have dreads and stuff in the military. So I think my hair would probably be okay, but that was like a rule that you cannot have dreads that's out of regs. And the reason is because it was unkempt. Oh, that's the word they kept using. Yeah, your hair is unkempt. But when my hair is in a nappy ass ponytail, nobody says nothing. If it's like this with no gel on it, it's great. Like, yeah, you get in trouble if your hair is done, if it's below your collar. Like, it was just ridiculous. Anyway, and then in my job now, I drive. If you don't know, these Amazon people are the worst. The tech company people, let me say all of them, but mostly Amazon. They're the worst racist people that get on the bus. So when I worked in the morning, I always did it on purpose because I knew they didn't want to talk. But I'll be like, good morning. They'll be getting in the bus like this, trying to look down at the floor, like, so they don't have to make eye contact and say good morning. I just kept doing it every fucking morning. They're rude. They're the most disrespectful people, and they have this entitlement, like you have to let them get on the bus. I mentioned that they're white or Indians.
There we go. We gotta profile these people. Profile these motherfuckers. So, you can't just be like all Amazonians are the devil. You know,
these tech company people that are white.
There we go.
And majority Indian people. They do not speak, and they're rude. And there's even instances where, like, non-Amazon people that I had to drive out to, like, Woodinville and stuff, they don't want to get on the bus. Like, they'll look in the bus and see that it's the black bus driver. Oh, I'm gonna wait for the next one. I don't care. You can wait 2 hours and get on the next one, because I really don't care. I drop them off and go home. But yeah, like, ridiculous. People who are not Seattle natives are ridiculous.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
No,
that's another dig right there. So we're gonna let that one go. We're gonna let that one go. We're gonna move along. Let's move along.
But yeah, so yeah, those were my experiences with how people think I'm supposed to assimilate in the military, and then also driving the bus. These folks be talking crazy. Like, you're in a wheelchair and you want me to help you get on the bus, but you're trying to talk to me like I'm your slave. Like, you're not getting on my bus. So, and then also the trainer, they show these videos of things that happen and how you should have reacted. So there was like this black bus driver female, open the door, and it's this white lady out there that be calling her a nigger. And the girl told her, nah, don't get on my bus. The last time you called me a nigger, and closed the door and drove off. And then the teacher goes, well, so do you think she should have reacted like that? I'm looking around like, yeah. But, and he's Mexican, by the way, who's saying this story.
You played it smooth. You got the best reaction out of her, because it could have been a hell of a lot worse.
Right. Exactly. So he's like, yeah, that for someone calling you a name, it's not that serious. Bruh.
That's how it is.
But you're in the training department saying that. And then another trainer who's from Fiji, he talking about somebody got on talking about what up in, but he's a in. I don't know if he was trying to be racist or what, but his skin is browner than mine. So I don't know, but I'm looking like, do you not hear what you just said? Yeah, some people get on and yeah, they say what's up in, but he's a in. No, do you mean he's black?
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, those are some of the experiences.
This area is the worst. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like, with that training stuff, like you're pointing out, I'm just like, that's a cliche thing for someone to say who just doesn't get it.
Right.
I'm like,
who doesn't care.
Yeah,
who doesn't care.
Doesn't care. Yeah. Like, one of the, because it's like, oh, well, she, probably shouldn't have, no, that person probably shouldn't have said that word. Right. I don't care if you want to say if it's just a word. It's derogatory. It's wrong. It's insulting. I don't care who you are. And definitely don't come in here trying to defend it by saying, oh, well, other black people say it to each other. I don't care. That doesn't make it better for a white person to then say it just because they're like, oh, well, black people say it to each other. No, you need not come with no argument defending my actions or being like, no, catch the second bus then. Thank you. That's what it's gonna be. I'm not gonna curse them out. You saw in the video, I did not curse them out. So great, we're gonna go about our day. You just saw me say thank you, have a good day, close the door.
Right.
Customer service, 100%. There we go. Okay, is nah.
Yeah, and I think it's just also dismissive too. Yeah, if you're being called a name,
Right.
it's like this
A
is not
name.
just a
Like, that's what I
name.
was sitting there like,
Sorry.
am I the only one hearing this? And we're majority Black people. Like, unless you're at the bases, like out at Bellevue, majority of the people you see in your building are Black drivers. Majority of the drivers are Black. So for you to say that's just a word, boy, bye. I was just
Right,
like,
and that shows you how much they don't even actually care about diversity or diversity training, because they dismiss racial slurs as being called a name and then tell you, but you still need to give somebody good customer service. Absolutely not.
Because that's threatening.
Right.
That's a threat. And if someone says they're going to rape you, would you let them get on your bus? No.
Right.
saying someone's going to rape you, that's a threat. I'm not going to let you get on my bus.
right.
I'm zooming past you and I'm going to report you to the police.
No,
Right. Oh, do any of you guys have examples of code switching at work?
I would say I mean, I think sometimes it's been intentional and other times it hasn't been, as far as my code switching, because I think some of it just comes off that I've been told at times, oh, you speak people tell me I speak very white, and I mean, I attribute that some to honestly just frankly how I was raised. I mean, I was raised in a white household. Not to say that I wasn't. I mean, I have an open adoption, so I am around my birth family. But I think sometimes because I do speak the way that I speak, it will automatically just be assumed like, oh, okay, she's this kind of woman, or she does this kind of thing, and then people will see, oh no, okay, like maybe we like judged her too quickly. And working in foster care, a lot of it's like dealing with attorneys, dealing with judges, very legal in a sense. So I think to an extent, some of that, like I will maybe try to a little bit to appease. But when I'm working with my caregivers, and my foster parents, like I'm very quick to tell them, because I let them know point blank, I said, at the end of the day, you are a white person. And if they do happen to have a trans special placement, I'll be like, your child is Black or your child is Hispanic, what have you for the child placement. But I will say, like, no matter what you do, you can't do enough. So you have to make sure that your child is around other people who look like them, both children and adults. And I think sometimes people will be like, oh, maybe you need to like kind of be like hand holding with things. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to hand hold anybody, because it doesn't help a child at the end of the day. For me, race was a huge conversation that happened in my house. So I'm very fortunate and lucky about that. But I know that it's not the same case for everybody. And I think parents sometimes get this like mindset of like, oh, I'm a parent, so let me just provide my child a loving, safe home. And that's definitely not enough, especially if you are of a different race. Like, no, it's not enough to just provide a loving and safe home and think that you're doing what you're doing, or to depend on your schools, because people's schools and people's neighborhoods are sure as heck not as diverse as everyone wants to say or believe that they are. And so, I mean, I definitely, like I said, probably sometimes am unconscious about it. And I think that's been a blessing and a curse, because people have gotten to thinking like, oh, she's one way, and oh, we can say, and not that people are around me saying like racist, derogatory things constantly, not by any means is that what I'm saying. But I think people sometimes like will think, oh, it's just fine to say this, and it's not going to be an issue. And then when I'm like, oh no, it is an issue, people get caught off guard. Because I've definitely seen a change in my coworkers to how they talk to me recently to how it used to be. And one of my coworkers has gotten real silent recently. Like we used to, message, check in, just say hi, whatever. And she like doesn't say anything to me. But I think it's because people have seen the shift in that. I'm like, no, if you guys want to say these things, like you need to be about it. Like when I'm on these meetings, I'm calling people out, not necessarily like personally to them, but I'm saying, oh, I heard this was something we talked about. Is this still happening or is it not? Like I definitely feel like I'm doing, finding myself doing that. And I've definitely like walked away from like work days, although I am working like remotely, feeling like, ooh, I think people are probably looking at me as like potentially she's kind of like the angry Black woman, which is just such a weird thing. But I'm like, I mean, I'm not saying that like I don't know it's a true like perception that people get sometimes, but it's just been like, I feel like people have been like real quick to also, I feel like, overspeak me. Like I'll say something and I've just been super hypersensitive and aware of being like, I said this same thing, that so did this white person, and then it's like, oh, that's a good idea. But I'm like, I know I said that exact same thing. Like I feel like what I said is the same. And mine was like, oh yeah, we'll think about it. But then when this other person said it, it's like, oh, great idea. Yeah, let's add that to the list. Let's write that down. And I'm just like, do you hear that? Do you see it? And I think people don't, but there's definitely been a tension of like hypersensitivity, like at the workplace and just around, I don't know, just like how things are. And I guess like I feel like it's become clearer than ever just how also it's like, yeah, you can say something, you all can say the same exact thing, but if it's not like, if you don't have the same, skin tone as me, then I'm not maybe going to listen as intently to what you're saying.
Yeah, so that made me think of this article that I was reading about pet to threat. Have you guys heard of this? Like you start off in the corporate setting and you come in, and because you're code switching, you're like, oh yeah, hey, whatever, trying to appease people so you're not offending or scaring or whatever the case is at work. It starts off as good and they see, oh, this is a really hardworking person. She always gets stuff done. And then once you start pointing out certain things, like people not delivering on things that they were supposed to, or not holding up their end on a project that you guys are working on together, then all of a sudden you turn to the threat at work and not actually the person that they just like, the Black person in the corner who just gets stuff done. You turn to this threat, and then you start having a bunch of microaggressions against you, or all of a sudden you're not performing and then you're trying to be managed out of the company at that point. Have you guys heard of this concept, pet to threat at work?
Girl.
Brea,
girl,
you?
Clearly I've heard of this concept. I've been through it. I'm going through it at the moment, where in my gut I kind of feel like the business is trying to manage me out the door. If I had to sit back and ask my white managers, like, what is your take on me? They would turn around and say, you're pretty aggressive. You're pretty, and you're a rebel rouser. You are a whistleblower. And it's for the sheer fact that you're asking me to uphold standards that no one else on the team is meeting. Right? So now I almost feel like I'm like a case study, right? I almost feel like you're using me to unveil some gaps and some, that challenges that need to be, made across the wider team, so that you then as a corporation can then go back and fix these things, right? But at the same time, I am the one that's at expense of all of this, right? And so now I'm feeling like I'm very disposable to this company. All the while, though, while you're making me bend over backwards to achieve things that really are not realistic, and I'm calling out the fact that nobody is delivering on these standards, you're using that data, that information, to say that, okay, here are the areas that we need to improve upon, while really not considering me as an employee, and saying that, okay, while we're using this data, while, she is outspoken and we, it may sting a little bit, it may hurt, we're going to be better as a wider business because of the things that she was not afraid to, come to the table with and expose. But all the while, you're sitting back really kind of managing me out of the business. I may not be present for much longer in this corporation, but yet you will continue to thrive and thrive better than ever before, because of the fact that you basically used me.
Based on your based on your
Mhm.
contributions, use those so they can make more money. Meanwhile, they just removed you from the company, or they don't promote you, or whatever the case may be, after they've stolen your ideas and gave it to somebody else. Now that person is promoted, and then you're sitting here like, okay, so now I'm doing level X work, but I'm getting paid as a so-and-so. Meanwhile, this person who hasn't been doing shit but skating and stealing ideas and acting like they're there, they now are making way more money than I am. But then
because they look the part and they fit the
part, right?
You got to get out.
So
you got to get out. Honest to goodness, because it's not good for your mental health. You have got to get out.
So speaking of health, Alicia, each person, how do you guys think these things, the images that you've seen, the racism that you experience on a daily basis, how do you guys think that is manifested mentally, psychologically, physically? Because I do know that outside of the mental enslavement that a lot of people are in, because you are still kind of shackled to these things if you have to go to work and code switch in order to even bring your paycheck home, how do you think that is like affects you overall in your mental space? Like,
it's a mental blocker of our potential, of our God-given potential.
Hey, Melanated fam. I wanted to create the sidebar as the ladies and I went off on a little tangent and talked more about ways in which you can help maintain a healthy mental space, but not so much how our experiences have manifested in the mind and body. So I jotted down some notes here to share, since I believe this is a very important topic and shouldn't be grazed over. And these are just going to be some of my own experiences and things that I've recognized have manifested in me based off of the racial injustices I've experienced in my life. I also took some notes on the things that ladies were saying that made sense to go with this topic that we talked about when we went off on our tangent. So I just want to share some of those with you. So the first thing that Alicia mentioned was that constantly being beat down turns into a mental blocker of our potential. And I believe that to be the case. There are a lot of times where, especially in this time with the social climate and things going on with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I found it very hard to focus on my work, get my work done, be productive. And so when you're constantly thinking about your safety, you can't really think about anything else, especially when it's super prevalent. Another thing that I would mention is exhaustion. Brea brought this up while we were talking, and she just talked about how she recently needed to take about 2 weeks off of work and just come back to, so she could come back to be her whole self. And one thing that she mentioned that you should do is be unapologetic about having to take time to get back to yourself. Another thing that I would say is a very real thing for me is living in fear. I live in fear every day. I'm very cautious about where I go, what time I go there. And an example that came up recently was my husband was saying, well, we need to take a break. Maybe we should go out to the cabin. Go out to a cabin, relax, be by the water, or be in the mountains. And with all that's going on, I told him that sounds great and I would love to do that. But at the same time, I'm not willing to risk our lives going out to a cabin, because we're going there to decompress. But when you go out to the cabins, you're going out to outskirts, which means you're going out to areas where there are more white people. And I'm afraid to go to these places, especially during this time, because I feel that will be targeted. So something as simple as wanting to go to a cabin, we can't do, or we could, but at the same time don't feel safe doing so. So that's something that has been an issue for me at the moment, is my safety. I would also say when it comes to kids, I live in fear of having kids. I don't know if I want to have kids because I don't know what someone might do to my kid. And even before like what someone might do to my kid, I'm afraid that I may not even make it out of the hospital because Black women lose their lives at a higher rate than every other race of women in the emergency room or when they're delivering babies because doctors fail to believe that they're in pain or whatever the case may be. I'm fearful of doctors to the point where I don't know if I would even decide or have a kid because maybe the kid will make it here, but I won't make it out of the hospital. I won't be able to go home with my kid because of the racial injustice that are seen within these hospital walls. Another way that I feel that I've seen in myself when I was a little bit younger, and in a lot of people still to this day, is that it manifests in a way of accepting exploitation or abuse. And so I will say, as a Black woman and not a light-skinned Black woman, at one point in time, around 18, 19, meeting all these fuck boys and knowing that they're that and that I feel like I deserve something better. But at the same time, since I'm not light-skinned, I know what comes with that as well. And so it's dealing with people who treat you like shit, but you're like, well, I guess I have to deal with it because this is all I'm going to get. So if I want to be in a relationship, I guess this is what I'm going to get because I'm Black. And so I see a lot of women accepting abuse within relationships because they don't think that they're good enough. And not think they're good enough comes from being beat down since you were a child, especially if you are brown skin or if you're dark skin, especially if you're dark skin. That is the first thing and the main thing that someone is always teasing you about. So once you become an adult, you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll get what I can get. And I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but that's been true for me. A very small period of time where I allowed these type of things to happen, and then I'm like, nah, fuck that. Like, but in general, being taught to accept exploitation and abuse in any relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or not, I see racial injustice manifest that way. I would also say that anger and violence comes up. And this is in a way where if you're constantly being beat down, you become hopeless and you find things to cope. And these are usually alcohol or it's drugs. And sometimes these things lead to violence. Or I would say from the anger point of view, it's constantly being demeaned. And once it happens over and over and over again, you might just meet that one person who says something and you go the fuck off. Like, and it's not even a second thought. And other people view that as, okay, you're just popping off, you're crazy, you have anger issues, but not realizing this has happened to you 50 times before this person just did the 51st time. And that's why you're reacting. Another thing that I have listed here is being skeptical and fearful of doctors. So in addition to an OBGYN or delivering a baby, doctors in general, like some of them you can tell they just are uncomfortable seeing you even in their doctor's office when they come in. I've had that experience here when I had to switch doctors when I moved north. And then you also just become skeptical of the things that they're recommending or not recommending, because there is an entire history of medical apartheid, in a sense, if that's what you want to call it. And it was, and I think still is, a very real thing. And so just being skeptical and fearful of doctors' orders, what they're going to do to you, or what they will skip over because they don't care for your health as much as they say they do. Your health is different than maybe a white person's health. And so, yeah, that's another thing. And a huge thing I would say is being okay with death. And I would say I see this more in men, but it's a huge thing to be like, oh yeah, I made it to 21, so I'm good. Like, a lot of people don't expect to live past a certain age. And after you become accustomed to being talked to like shit, being demeaned, being beat up mentally, physically, being assaulted by people who are supposed to be people in power who are supposed to protect you. A lot of people just become okay with the idea of death than being here, because what could be worse than what they have to live in on a daily basis? And so those are just a few things that I jotted down and wanted to share about how growing up Black or living in a Black body and dealing with racial injustice on a daily basis can manifest mentally, physically. And physically, from this, I would say just leading unhealthy lifestyles that lead to certain medical diagnosis, eating unhealthy, diabetes, hypertension. You guys know this list, you hear it all the time, but these are ways in which these things manifest in the mind and body. And so while the ladies and I were talking, some examples of ways you can make sure you are mentally healthy. We talked about going to see a counselor or a therapist, and Alicia mentioned you could even do this through an online media, so in person or online. I have seen a counselor. My husband and I have gone to a marriage counselor before getting married. And so I'm a huge advocate for counseling, but I do also know that I'm speaking from a place of privilege because we specifically wanted to go to a person of color. And there was no one within our healthcare where we could use our insurance and go see who was a person of color. And so we decided to go outside of that and pay out of pocket to ensure that we got the experience that we wanted to. And so, but we've also seen options as cheap as 30 to 50 bucks a session. And so that is also something that you can try out if you're wanting to fill out therapy. Go that route, find something cheaper, go in, see if they can help give you some coping mechanisms that work with your personality, how you see things, how you view things, and then go from there. I mentioned journaling to the ladies because I write a lot. I have since I was in elementary school, just had journals and stuff like that, and I've continued to do it through my adult life, and I feel like that's helped me a lot. Expressing my feelings, getting out, certain frustrations from the day. Also keeping me centered and just focused on the things that I want to do and where I'm trying to go. Massages, acupuncture, taking a walk regularly, exercising regularly. And a huge thing I think is just being cognizant of what you're consuming, what you're putting in your body. So that goes from the things you eat, things you drink, whether this is a bunch of soda, water, alcohol. Let's err on the side of more water than the other. TV, so things that you're watching is also part of your consumption. Be leery of those things because they do start to seep into your daily life and how you think about things, but also say the things that you read. So those are just a list of things that I wanted to share to make sure we addressed how social injustice and being Black in America manifests in the mind and the body, and ways you can start to break those things down so you can become a more healthy person, healthy you. Thanks, you guys. So in closing, you guys, everybody, 20, 30 seconds. After this entire conversation, what do you guys have to say to the people who make statements like, are you sure that was a race thing? Or everything isn't about race. This is not about race. Like, why do you guys keep bringing up race? What do you have to say to those people?
Repent. That's all I gotta say. Repent.
You're so lucky that it's not about race for you. That's what I would say.
I say yes, my opinion stands.
I would say people need to be doing a lot more listening.
Mm-hmm.
I think they need to be in a
Shantel,
mind
go
of
ahead.
understanding. I was like, I just think they need to put themselves in a mind of understanding, because you have to figure, you don't know unless you understand and actually go out and put yourself out there to be uncomfortable, to learn the things that we are complaining about. Nobody's complaining about things if it's not happening. So just understanding.
Elentée?
I would say that they don't have the right to make that comment. Period. Like, you can't tell me what's race for me. For me, this is my experience. So you can't tell me, no, it's not a race thing. How do you know? That's how I felt. You can't tell me I don't feel that way. So you need to pay attention and listen, and don't make comments like that because you sound crazy.
And I would just say that I don't even believe the people who say, are you sure this is about race? Because it's usually a white person who's saying it. And bitch, you're the one who created this system of racism. So yes, bitch, you know it's about race. You know that you or your family or somebody that you know has done something like this, and it has been about race. And so Black people wouldn't have to even think it was a race issue if you never created the system in the first place. That's what I would have to say. You know it's about race. Watching. This is just my opinion, but I don't believe racism is a Black issue. It is a white issue. They created it. If you're so superior, why do you have to continue to make systems upon system on top of system in order to make yourself feel superior? If you were superior, you would just be that without having to oppress other people. So you need to do some inner work. Black people, practice group economics, please.
Yes.
The only way that they will understand. Thank you guys for sitting in on this session. I didn't think it was going to be almost 2.5 hours, but it was good. Oh, we're gonna have to play it off real quick. So in the beginning, I hadn't pushed the record button when I said like, "Hi guys, welcome to the Melanated discussion." So let's do it over, and then I'm gonna ask the same first question, and then you guys just do your response. So I'll have the clip. So the first question that I asked you guys was, oh, here it is. So I said, welcome everybody to the Melanated panel discussion. Today we're going to be covering the Black perspective, the Black American perspective in America. And so let's just jump right into it. Is race an issue in the U.S.?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Okay, got it. Try it now. It shows you as unmuted now. See if we can hear you.
Speak, Jasmine.
Can she? I was gonna say, can she hear you? Because she ain't talking.
I don't think she hears us.
You say you gonna cut
I don't think so
out?
either.
Put it in
Yeah,
the
I
chat.
can cut it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and fill my glass real quick while she tries to put it together.
Okay.
Y'all tripping. It's 8:42 over here on a Saturday. Y'all tripping.
Whatever, it's quarantine. Where are you going?
Y'all act like, don't let this Versace blouse fool y'all now. I'm about to pour it up.
Yeah, that's for the intro.
So I'm gonna not hold anything back, because I was like, hey, if you want to be about all the support, I'm about to call you out. So
Yeah, anyway, so I'm trying to help y'all out. I'm trying to help y'all realize yourselves.
right.
If one more white person sends me a screenshot, a text message, an email, a voice memo, or picks up the phone and calls me and says, you know what, Brea, I just watched The Help.
What? Oh my God.
If I hear one more,
it's just like he's like the person that has like I have a black friend. He's like one of those. I have a black friend, so I feel like I know and I understand you guys. But he always says like crazy stuff, and everybody be looking.
If
like,
you knew, you wouldn't be saying what you're saying.
Exactly.
And I'm sure he says more crazy stuff and be like, "Oh, this is not racist." Like if you have to say this is not racist, then this
is
racist. This conversation.
And he just has
so he thought he was jumping to action and doing the right thing by saying, "Hey, it's not segregated here, but I just want to let you know, like it feels a little weird that the blacks are in the front and the whites are in the back." Just like, okay,